Hello.
Hi,
Could you say your name for us, please?
my name is Nhung TRAN-DAVIES.
And to begin with, do you mind taking us back to 1975, before the end of the war? Could you describe for us your life at that time?
Um, yeah, before 1975, I was just born actually in 1973, and so I would have been only a couple of years old at the time. But at the time, our family were living in Gambao, a southern part of Vietnam, and my father had died before the war, and so it was just my mom and six kids. Um, and life was difficult during the war. And there were, in the house, what I am told, at one point mom had lived with grandma as well, and there are cousins and such, but she was a seamstress, and so she worked hard to try to raise six kids, um, yeah, on her own. And then after, around those years after the fall of Saigon, um, because of the poverty, the destruction at the time, and the hardship from the oppressive government. Mom tried to make a living. She dragged us, six kids here and there, throughout, the countrysides and the southern part, trying to make a living. And um, yeah, no, it's just many years of struggles. Yeah.
How old were your oldest sibling when you were 2 years old, for example?
Oh gosh, I have to do math on that and see, because in '79, I think my oldest sister was about 21, 22. So that was in '79. So
17, 18?
so in '75, yeah, it would have been, yeah.
And do you mind my asking how your dad died?
My father had died during the war. I believe he was one of the soldiers or officers in the war, and he left one day and just never came back until, so we just assumed that he died at war. Yeah, it's a detail that we often don't disclose, in that the first three older siblings are from um, a first marriage, my mom's first marriage, and he was very abusive. And so, she had gone through a whole lot with having to survive that relationship. And then with my father, then he had passed away. So there were my mom and has six children. Yeah.
So, when you said that it was a struggle for her to make a living, she dragged you all over the place. What kind of work did she find?
Because she didn't have a lot of education, because at that time, women were expected to stay in the home to raise their children, and of course the skills that she developed was as a seamstress, and so she took us, to various places to try to establish a life, and she was also an entrepreneur in some ways, because you had to find various ways to make a living, and they would find, I believe, various merchandise to try to sell at the markets, fruits and vegetables and things like that, to sell at the market. And she would, we would be living in the rural, very remote place, and she would often, sail the little boat down the river, down the canal, to bring food to market to sell. And I would hear stories of times when, by the time she got to market, the fruits or whatever the produce is would go bad, and they wouldn't be able to sell. She would bring my older siblings along with her to the market, but there were many failed ventures, and there were times when they would go travel, hours to market with various things, and then they would encounter the soldiers along the way, who would confiscate all the things, leaving them with nothing to sell at the market. And so it was very hard making a living, but she tried various means. And in the countryside, we tried to farm a bit as well. And during those times, because of the oppressive government, there were stories of her being blindfolded and dragged by soldiers, because they, had just, for I guess, authority and oppressive reasons. They were abusive in that way to their citizens. She had bullets shot at her and such as well. And so she had been through a lot just to try to make a living for her children. And at nighttime, because she is a seamstress, she tried to stay up through the nights, working by candlelight just to sew the clothes for us, so that we can have clothes to wear, but at the same time to sew clothes to sell or repair as a seamstress as well. And so she worked hard to keep us going. But during those times, there were only 2 sets of clothes that you could wear throughout the whole year. And at that time, because of the destruction of the war and the oppression from the government, we were often desperate to find, even a grain of rice to eat. And Mom would say that tell us that people were being robbed and killed for a bag of rice. And my older brothers and sisters often had to forgo eating so that the little ones would not starve. And so those years were very difficult. The rations that the government gave us were, barely enough to subsist on, and there were, times where, you would have yams, my sister says, and there would be worms, dead worms inside, but you had no choice but to eat the yams because you were hungry. And so the times were very difficult during those years.
How old was your mom at that time, in these years?
I think she was in her because she was in her early 40s when we got to Canada, and so she would have been in her mid to late 30s in the years following the war.
And you mentioned that your older siblings were going to the market to help your mom and all that. Were the younger siblings allowed to go to school, or did you have the means to go to school?
No, we didn't have the means to go to school because Mom had us at home, during the times, in the year that we had escaped in 1978, during that year. So it was many years of hardship, and then in 1978, around November or so, we were actually living in a hut in the remote rural area of, I think, the Ganta or Gadal area, and a flood, had come through, and so we were confined to living on the loft of that hut for, I think, up to a month. But yeah, the younger siblings didn't go to school because we didn't have the means to. However, at that time, because my uncle was living in Saigon, and he was a teacher, and he had convinced the older siblings, my mom, to let the older siblings to go to Saigon to go to school, whereas the younger one stayed home to help around the house. And when she went to market, of course, my sister, who was just a few years older, because in 1978 I would have been 4, so my sister would have been 7 or 8, and at that time she would stay at home looking after myself and the brother next to me while Mom would be out. And so those were just the facts of how life was at that time. But yeah, in 1978 we were living in a hut, and we were flooded. The area we were in was flooded, and we were confined there for about a month until my older brothers and sister were able to come to get us and let us know, of the plan to leave, to escape Vietnam.
So can I just also ask you a couple of questions about that time? How did you manage to live in basically the attic of your home for a month?
My mom is a courageous, resilient, resourceful woman, and so I'm not too sure how she was able to manage to sustain us for that long, but she was able to. When you are in the midst of war and conflict, you I guess get that internal strength and drive to do whatever you need to survive and to help your children, to care for your children. And so through various means, and of course at the same time, I shouldn't forget this, is that Mom often told us stories of during those times when it was difficult, we sometimes got by on the kindness of other people because there were very little food around, but there were some really kind-hearted individuals that would, even though they had very little, they gave us, you know, a little bit of their rice so that we can survive day by day on that. And so those little acts of kindness have always stuck with Mom, because it meant, you know, life and death for a lot of us. And because of those little acts of kindness, she never forgets who had been kind to her and generous to her during those hard years. And even to this day, you know, she would send money back to Vietnam to help the individuals who had helped her during those times. And so, you know, and people just find ways to survive. Yeah.
And but she was not she was striking out on her own. She wasn't always living next to your grandparents and
No.
relying on that
Yeah.
extended family support.
Mm-hmm. That's it.
Tell us about the plans you plan to escape that your older siblings, now in the city, was concocting, I guess.
Yeah, no, my uncle in the city in Saigon, he's a teacher, the oldest uncle, and he had plans of, you know, purchasing a boat, I believe, and trying to, you know, make our escape during that route. I think at the time the political issue at the time was that we were what they call Ngui Wa. We were half Chinese, and so the new government didn't like the Ngui Wa, the half Chinese individuals, because they felt we were, I think, reflected the capitalist, mentality, and that we were wealthy people that took from the rich. I don't know all the details of the mindset at the time, but I know that there were a lot of prejudice, and so we were exiled in some ways, where we were told to leave the country, but at the same time we were told to leave the country, but we were not allowed to leave because if you were leaving, you would be considered a traitor. But if you left, and if you wanted them to sort of turn their backs, turn away and not enforce that rule, you had to pay, I think, bribe them with money. And they were just trying to sort out, my uncle and were trying to sort out a way for us to leave the country. And during the time, because we were caught up in living in the loft and the hardship and the destruction, their mom knew at that time that there was no future for her children in Vietnam. She felt that the future for her children lay beyond the seas, and she felt that when my older brother and sister came to tell us of what Uncle's plans are, she knew at that point that she had to make that decision, to take her children out to sea, despite the risk that would come with it, the not knowing if whether you would live or die. She felt that she had to put our fate in God's hand to take us out to sea, because at the time, there was nothing there, and so she sacrificed everything so that there would be a future for her children. And she held on to hope, and the hope, for a better future for the children, and just the desire to be free, have their freedom from war and poverty. And so it just all came together at during that time, that she knew that it was the right decision to make.
Can you tell me about the trip? What details you remember or were told?
Yeah, I was very young at that time. Of course, I was 4, and so I only remember bits and pieces. But I know, partly from the recollections of my older siblings and my mom, that we were cramped in a boat with about 300 other people in this, rickety old fishing boat. And our family was stuck in the belly of the boat, and so it was very dark and damp underneath. And I can remember vaguely being feeling very suffocated because you were packed in, and you had no room to stand, you had no room to stretch out your legs, and so it was suffocating being down there. And being at sea, though, it was during the months of storms, and so the sea was quite rugged, and the boat was thrashed and by the high waves, and so we were thrown about a bit. But at the same time, being in a boat that was being thrown about in the sea, people got nauseated and of course threw up, and with nowhere to go, a lot of people threw up where they sat. And being that we were at sea for a few days, people defecated where they sat, and people urinated where they sat, and so the stench of being in the bottom of the boat was just unbearable. And I can remember that it was a nauseating feeling and a suffocating feeling. But being little, Mom held me in her arms while the other siblings sat beside. And of course, there was a time when my brother was so sick from just the whole experience that she had to beg to let him up onto the deck to get some fresh air. But it was a very, very hard experience for everybody on board. But at the same time, as an adult, I know that despite how difficult it was, we were the lucky ones, because I learned later that, little did I know at that time, that the boat that left, mere minutes before us, that boat crashed at sea. And so that boat, all the lives on that boat were taken. I can imagine all the family members still at shore, the mothers and fathers and brothers, sisters, forever wondering whatever happened to their family. And so we were the lucky ones that were able to make it to Malaysia within a couple of days and nights. But I hear stories, whereas my brother-in-law, he was at sea, and their boat had ran out of gas, and they drifted at sea, and they were attacked by pirates. And so there were many horrible stories that were worse off than ours, and women being raped at sea and such. And so we felt we were the lucky ones, despite the difficulties.
What year was this that you left?
This was in November 1978, and yeah.
And do you know anything about how much your mom would have had to pay for this voyage?
I know Mom had thrown a number out, and I don't remember exactly, but they had sold all their things to buy gold bars, and there were so many gold bars for each person. And I know that it took years, even after we came to Canada, it took years for Mom to pay back some of because she had borrowed, I think, some money from Uncle and such for some of to pay for and so it was quite a lofty sum relatively for families who don't have much in the first place.
Do you remember where the boat left from?
I think my older sister Fong had said it was Gang Hao, somewhere on the shore, on the southern shore.
So you didn't have to travel all the way to Saigon to the city or anything like that. It was closer
we
to
did,
where you were.
Yeah, no, we did briefly go up to Saigon to meet with Doggo, our oldest uncle, and then we somehow made our way back down to where the departure was. Mm-hmm.
And how many days did you say did it take you to go to Malaysia?
For us, Mom said, I think it was just 2 days and 2 nights, and so we were very fortunate. Yeah.
What happened next?
When we got to the shores of Malaysia, Mom said we landed in an area where there were some American tourists, and they ran up to our boat, and they said, they told us to punch holes at the bottom of our boat, because my understanding was that at that time, because Malaysia was flooded with refugees, if the Coast Guards had caught our boat, they would drag our boat back to international waters because they didn't want any more refugees, which is in part understandable. And so, but we were desperate. We needed to stay, and so of course everybody, we tried to punch holes at the bottom of our boat so that we did sink at shore. And so the people, the Coast Guards there, had no choice but to drag, to take us, receive us to the refugee camps in Malaysia. And so there in Malaysia, we stayed at camp for 8 months. And the conditions were, the bare minimal in these camps. We had to climb the local mountain, to chop wood to build our own shelter. And the Red Cross, I believe, did come in to ration food. And so there were, kind humanitarian workers there, but we did our best to do what we can to live as we wait for, what the future holds. Mom prayed often that somebody would want us to take us from the camp.
What camp was this?
My sister said there were 2 camps. There was a camp called Cherating, and the other one is Kuantan refugee camp. And so there, and I think we slept in bunks as well. I remember having to climb up and playing with the other kids and such. And and actually, on in the camp there was also, I had fallen, because I was only 4. I turned 5 when I was there, and I had fallen off the bunk, and I got a little mark here. And then my brother was chopping wood, actually, trying to chop wood. He was, I think, about 15 at the time, and being a young girl, I following my brother, I followed him, and I think I stood behind him, and when he raised the knife to chop the tree, he sliced my, at my cheek. And so so there's a little bit of a scar, a reminder of our times in the camp. And it was better than it was when we were in Vietnam, but still, it wasn't ideal for anyone.
So how did it come to be decided that you would immigrate, settle in Canada?
Mom said that she prayed every day for someone to want us, and she would, we're sort of Buddhist in some ways, but she would even go up to, the statue of Mother Mary and pray, and she would, bargain with Mary that if somebody wanted us, she would convert us, or however. But it's just something that was, in her hopes that someone would want us, and we didn't know if anybody wanted us. Mom said that we did apply to go to various countries, but we didn't hear back that anybody wanted us until we heard that Canada wanted us, but we didn't know who wanted us until we arrived. Arrived in the country. So we didn't know, but we were rejoicing in that way. And of course, when you're told that you're going to go to Canada, Mom, lots of people were warning against Canada because the impression was Canada was very cold. The snow was so high, it went up to your ears and your nose would fall off. But of course, Mom knew that her future was not, in Vietnam, that if this was a place that whose doors was open to us, that she would take that opportunity to take her children there. But when we arrived in Canada, though, when the plane touched down, that I think was when it hit her that we were in a new country, and she was she was just a seamstress with little education, and so she at that point was nervous. She realized that she was there with 6 children with only a dollar or two in her pocket, and she didn't know what she was going to do to help her children establish and become successful, survive in this new country. And so we sat on the airplane there, Mom said, we sat on the airplane there because she was nervous getting off, until an interpreter came up and sort of convinced her that she is here, she is safe, and she is welcome to come off the plane.
It was a Vietnamese interpreter.
It was a
told her that?
Vietnamese, yeah. In fact, actually, at a recent Tet celebration, I've always been told what his name was, but I've never met him. But a recent Tet celebration at the Shaw Center, I finally met this interpreter, Mr. Bao, who, helped a lot of individuals during that time. Mm-hmm.
And so you got off the plane, and that was when you discovered that you had sponsors?
Yes.
What was? Tell me about that moment.
Yeah, when we didn't know what was in store for us in Canada, but when we first stepped through the gates of the Edmonton International Airport, our lives forever changed, because in that moment we were welcomed by this crowd of really warm individuals, and the moment stuck in my mind, especially for me, was because as a little girl there was another girl, a young girl, who came up to me and had given me a doll in that moment, and from a young girl's perspective, my heart rejoiced, and it came to me in that moment in time. It came to represent all the kindness and compassion and generosity that Canadians were, and so that moment stuck with me for basically my whole life. And that doll that was given to me, I had held on to and cherished for the past 40 years, and I use it, or I look at it as a reminder as to where I come from and the kindness that was given to our family, to myself, so that I can live to honor our sponsors and to pay forward that kindness. But when we realized that we were sponsored, we later learned that these sponsors, led by, it was a church group from the Enoch area, and it was led by Father Goche, and their mission, their goal was to search out and to sponsor a family that nobody else, that was difficult to sponsor, that a family that nobody else wanted. And we realized that they had, intentionally searched for us, because of course it didn't seem as if any other nation wanted us, because it was Mom and these 6 dependent children, and she was a seamstress only with little education, and so they probably felt that we would be a burden to their country, whereas this church group specifically wanted us, and so we bear a lot of gratitude for our sponsors.
Tell us about the first days and weeks that you were there. What kind of help did you receive from your sponsor? How did you settle? How did you find your way around?
Our sponsors became an integral part of our integration into Canada, our settling into Canada, because they seem to have been there every step of the way for us at the beginning. They whisked us to, at that time there was a Pan Am hotel near the Kingsway area, and they helped us settle there for a few days, and then they helped us move to an apartment, and they took us out to, I believe, to have our first McDonald's or some sort of burger, and they would often tell us how we turned our noses to it. It didn't really agree with us, but they quickly introduced us to the different cultural aspects of Canada. They took us shopping, and through the early years, they of course took us to the schools that we went to, and would drive us to the school the first initial part, so that we get used to it, and helped arrange for myself, for example, to have a sitter, or a lunchtime or so, to have lunch, a place to go to. And one of our sponsors, like Vicky, for example, we always laugh at it, because she always was the one who took me to the dentist. And so I usually, even though as much as I adore her, I sometimes dread seeing her, because I knew that we were going to have to go to the dentist when I see her. And so, yeah, they played a huge part in every aspect of our life. They would bring clothes, used clothes and such, to donate to us. And one sponsor would teach my sisters how to braid hair, and also how to braid these hanging baskets as well. And they helped us, settle our first mortgage, and to buy our first car. And so they had a huge, significant role and impact on our lives in the early years. But of course, our family's relationship with our sponsors did not stop there, because of the gratitude that Mom had for all that they've done for us. Mom made sure that every Christmas we drove, when my brother could drive, to drive our whole family to visit our sponsors, who mostly lived in the Spruce Grove area. So we would drive from Edmonton to Spruce Grove to visit them at Christmas time. And so that continued contact through the years allowed our families to grow together. Between us as kids and their kids as well, we became friends, and we attended each other's weddings through the years, and graduation, and so we remained integral part of each other's lives. And I consider them our family, and there were 5 main families in the sponsorship group that our family has remained close to over the past 40 years. Yeah.
So how long? No, let's go back to when you first arrived. Did your mom or your older siblings receive any ESL training?
In the early years, my older siblings did attend, which are in the schools. There were ESLs, English as a Second Language, in the schools. But my older brother and sister, my oldest brother did. He was 15-ish at the time, and so he did attend high school. The 2 older sisters went to, I think, what they call Alberta Vocational Center, and that was sort of like it had, I think, English as a Second Language integrated into that program, and so yes, there were additional language training for them. Whereas with myself, because I was so young, being 5. Turning 6 and such, I was able to pick up the language fairly quickly, whereas my older brother and sisters had a more difficult time, and they went into the workforce a little bit sooner to try to help, pay for our home and various to buy food and such. And so, yeah.
Did they receive any skills training at AVC as well?
Yeah, I believe it was some sort of skill training, and then they went on to NATE. My brother went into NATE to take mechanics. My oldest sister, went into a NATE to study to become a draftsperson, and my other sister took training to help at a dental office or so. And so, yeah, no, there were additional, but in the early years, though, the side jobs was that they helped, I think at some point they worked at like a seamstress place as a part-time job to make money to sew clothes and such, much like Mom. Yeah.
All 3 of them?
Yeah, at some point, I don't I haven't asked the details, but.
And what kind of work did your mom find? What was her first job?
In the early years, Mom worked pretty hard. At one point, she had held down 3 jobs just to bring food to the table and to work so that we could go to school. She worked mostly in a seamstress sewing clothes company, and so she works as a seamstress, and then at nighttime she would be a dishwasher, and also clean offices at the time. And so she worked extensive hours, and my brother and sister try to help out where they can. And then in the later years when I was older, as soon as I was able to work, I worked as well with, the money going back to help with the family. But yeah, Mom worked hard.
What was your first job?
My first job? I think my first job was at McDonald's.
How old were you?
14. Yeah, as soon as I was allowed to work, I started working at McDonald's. And the first few years of working before university, McDonald's, Harvey's, Toys R Us, and then Goodwill. And yeah, before I got into university, where of course I focused on schoolwork. Mm-hmm.
So, which of your siblings also went to university?
They went to post-secondary to NAIT. So my oldest sister went to NAIT, and my brother went into NAIT, and then there's a lot of them. So my oldest sister went to NAIT. The sister next to her, I think she just took the vocational training, and she helped work in a dental office. Then the brother next to her went into mechanical, took on mechanical training and became a mechanic for many years. He was the most valuable person in the home. The sister next to, she went to NAIT as well, but then later on she just had a family and stayed home with her kids. The brother who is next to me, he went and opened up a few Vietnamese restaurant. He's living in BC right now. And so, yeah.
So you were the only one who went to the university?
I went to the University of Alberta. I was the only one, yes, yeah.
And what did you study?
I went into medical school to become a doctor, and because I was reminded of because Mom often reminds us of where we come from, where we came from war and poverty. I always had it, I think, within me to try to work hard to succeed at school, and so I worked hard to be successful and to get into medical school, to be a doctor, because I think I could only identify myself because of my hopes of helping others and such. That I could only identify myself with becoming a doctor, because I'm not very good at arguing, for example, and so I couldn't be a lawyer, or I can't sell things, and because I'm not very good at being pressuring individuals to sell. So I just knew that medicine was for me, and so I worked hard to pursue that. And I feel that a lot of what I do is to honor our sponsors, because the early years in Canada were difficult, and there were a lot of cultural clashes between Mom and us. We're trying to pursue things that are Canadian, but at the same time sometimes things conflict with the values, the cultural values of the Vietnamese people and such. And
do you have an example of that?
Like simple things, like going out, to parties, for example, right? And for Mom, she was expecting us to study hard and to focus on school, to not do things to dishonor our sponsors, because she felt that they had invested in us to bring us to Canada, to give us lots of opportunities, and so we should not neglect that, and be grateful for what they've done for us. And so there were times where there were those simple conflicts, and that what Mom wanted of us, because she knew, because of what we've been through, that people can take everything away from you, but they can't take away your education. And that's a phrase that she often reiterated, and so she made it a point that we all finish school and to make something of ourselves, so that we would not dishonor our sponsors. And so in part, all that I do especially now, knowing as an adult, all, what I have and the family that I have, the home, the career that I have. I know that all that I have and all that I've become is because of the kindness and compassion and generosity of our sponsors. And so all that I do is to honor them and to pay forward the kindness that I myself had received. And so, I work hard to become a doctor so that I can help, the sick patients. And in the 20 years that or so that I've been in medicine, I've been able to pay forward that kindness and caring care to these patients. And so, yeah.
You also do a lot of charity work.
Yes, because I remember the kindness of our sponsors, and I feel how fortunate we are that we've been able to have all the hopes and opportunities because of our sponsors. In 2013, I was able to gather a few friends together, and so we established a registered charity, a Children of Vietnam Benevolent Foundation, because we just felt that we were so lucky to have been brought to Canada, yet our younger siblings in Vietnam were still stuck living in poverty, and so we felt a sense of obligation to pay forward the kindness that we receive and to do more for those who for those young individuals who do not have the hope and opportunities that we did. And so I've been able to establish that charity. At the same time,
and what do you do? And what does that charity do?
Yeah, we our focus, our mission is to give hope opportunities to children living in poverty through provision of basic needs, through love and education. So education is definitely a huge guiding principle for our foundation, because we know that if we give kids the opportunity to improve their learning, to get a broader, deeper education, then they have the potential to do whatever they want. And at the same time, when they're able to succeed at school, they can, in return, once they are successful, return to their community and help their community. And so it just, the success and that comes with it can have extensive reach to their community.
So it provides scholarships?
Yes, we do provide scholarships. So we help orphanages. We provide scholarships for the impoverished students. We've built schools. We built wells, and so we've done a variety of things. And actually, in recent years, we've also extended our mission to help the underprivileged individuals, children, in other countries as well as locally here in Canada. And so, and of course, I'm not doing this alone, right? None of us can do too many things alone. We have the support of the community and the support of good friends, and so we've been able to do that.
Sorry, was there another charitable initiative that you were about to mention?
Oh yeah, no, because of the opportunities that I've been given, of course, and being able to get a good education, I've been able to write books and stories as well, and so with the books that I've written, some of the proceeds have gone back to the charities, the various charities as well. And because of the kindness and compassion of our sponsors, I was inspired by them that to do the same in that when the Syrian war had broken out, and all the images of the people fleeing to sea, and the images of thousands perishing at seas, it just brought back a lot of memories of what we've been through. And I just felt that I could not do nothing, because it was hard to sleep at night in the comforts of our home, the security of a home, knowing that all these beautiful children were living in makeshift camps. And so I reached out again to my friends, and I was able to form two groups that, and one of the groups actually had my sponsors in it, and my sponsors' children in it, and to help sponsor 2 Syrian families to Canada. And actually, what was amazing in retrospect was that um, the families came in 2016, so about 40 years, from when I left. And one of the family is a mother with 5 kids. She's single with 5 kids, and I just identified with her. And so when they came through the gates, I had a doll there waiting for the little one who was about 6, so close to my age. And so it was my turn this time to be standing at the gate, um, giving this doll to this little beautiful Syrian girl. And so I just felt in that moment that I was passing in some way a torch, passing on the dreams of Canadians, all the kindness and compassion of Canadians onto this little girl. And I felt that in that moment that 40 years from now, that little girl will probably, be contributing to making Canada a more beautiful place. And so, I think what our sponsors had done for us has, in effect, affected a lot of positive change, locally and around the world without them even realizing it. Yeah.
Looking back now, how long do you think it took for you to feel at home, settled in?
For myself, I think it's a very easy answer because I was only a 5'6" at the time, and so it was a very smooth transition into the country, into the culture, the language, and so and making friends was easy. And of course, the school that I went to in the first few years had a lot of other refugees. St. Catherine's School in the closer to the inner city, and it had a lot of other refugee kids, and so we developed a really good bond and connection between us all. And so I think I felt quite at home very, very quickly. I know it may have been it was likely a different story for my older siblings because of the language barrier and such. And I know that there were times where I heard stories of them encountering sometimes a little bit of discrimination, right? And so it took a little bit longer for them, but for myself it was good. Yeah.
You've mentioned, how difficult your life was in the early years. Could you name like the top obstacles, struggles?
The struggles, I think more so, were felt more with my older siblings, but the top obstacles, of course, was the language barrier for my older siblings and my mom. And my mom didn't pick up the language as well. I forgot to answer that question earlier. She was offered ESL language, but because she was dedicated to working, to helping the kids, that she did not attend the schools to learn the language, and so she didn't become fluent in English as she could have, but it was because she had sacrificed all that just so that she can support us. But definitely language is a key barrier. The culture differences and such, sometimes I would go to school, smelling like Tiger Balm, and having marks on my neck because, and marks on my neck because, when you get sick and the Vietnamese, they would coin you so that, it releases bad air or so, humor or so, but, and so sometimes there is that cultural differences that when you go to school, the teachers will think, you were abused or so at home, but you're not. But that's just a minor, cultural difference. But, I'm sure there were, more differences felt with my older siblings. And getting, jobs to support, because we were, even though our sponsors helped the best they could in donating clothes and supplies and such, furniture and such, we still had to establish our own living, and so ensuring that we had jobs to pay the mortgage and such was a bit difficult, and so we didn't go to camp or play any sports and take music lessons because we just couldn't afford it because all the money went into the basic necessities. Um,
I forgot to ask you how long it took for you to buy your first house.
uh, it took for a year. We stayed in an apartment for about a year, and then Father Gauthier helped us, and our Mr. Henry and Mrs. Burry and the Burries helped us get our first mortgage for a townhouse in the north end of Edmonton. And actually, Mom still lives in that townhouse. She doesn't want to part with it because our sponsor had helped us get that place, and so it always bears strong sentimental value. And so yeah, but of course, once we got the mortgage, we didn't want to rely on anybody to pay it. We paid for it ourselves, and so all the money that she makes and my siblings make went into the mortgage. And even when we bought our first car, everything went into it. Yeah.
A year was a very short time for you to save up.
We didn't pay, yeah, because over time, and at the time, the government was good in that they had some sort of subsidy program to reduce the mortgage for low income. And of course, in the early years, we did rely a little bit on social assistance to help us get through, to get us, medications and such. And so it's, we couldn't do it on our own in the early years. We needed some government help, and they were generous enough to be there to have programs like that in place to help us transition into our life. Yeah.
Did the sponsors help you financially for the mortgage?
No, I don't think
they helped
so.
you sign the
they
paperwork
us,
and all that
like
stuff.
They asked us guarantor or so.
They were guarantors.
Yeah, something along that line. Sorry, I didn't ask the details, but because of them, we were able to get the mortgage. But to pay it was us. Yeah.
So did you need? Did you receive a little bit of a break in terms of the down payment that you would have to save up?
I'm not too sure how the agreement was at the time, but I know it was partly, there was a mortgage subsidy program that helped, but I'm not too sure what the arrangement was. Sorry.
That's all right. And it's 40 years now. What do you think about the life that you've created?
I feel blessed. I have a lot of gratitude every day for where I am, and to see the smiles on my children's face, and just reminds me of how lucky and fortunate our family had been to have these sponsors search for a family that nobody else wanted and had brought our family to Canada. And so not a day goes by that I don't have a sense of gratitude and humility for where I am and what I've become. Yes.
And what's your mother doing now?
Mom, she is being a grandma, a grandma to our kids. She's still quite healthy, and when she's back at her place, so I bring her out to our place in Calmar every other week, so she stays with us, and during those weeks she helps with this and that around the house so that I can go to work. I tell her she doesn't have to, but as a mother and grandmother, she just feels obligated. When the kids were young, she helped take care of the kids, but now that they're older, more independent, she just, does what seniors do around the house, and then she helps with the laundry. I think a lot of the Asian moms do that. She helps with the laundry and helps cook some of the meals for us. Because she's still fairly healthy. She's like about 84. She's 84 this year, but she's going strong. Yeah. But when she's back at her place, she still sews. Yeah, she still sews clothes for us and clothes for the grandkids, and she does this and that to keep busy, to keep her mind busy. Yeah.
So did she work in sewing all her life, pretty much?
Yeah. Yeah.
Until the age of 65?
Oh, well, she didn't stay employed. She had actually had to, because she developed an eye condition called blepharospasm, and her eyes kept spasming and she couldn't keep it open for an external potential. She had to retire early from her work, but she continues when she can to sew for us and such in her time, at her pace. But yeah, but all the kids and such are working for for her. Yeah.
And do you talk about your experiences leaving Vietnam, coming to Canada? Do you speak about those stories with your children?
hmm I do mention bits and pieces to our kids now and then. I don't sit down and tell the whole story in one sitting. It's like what my mom did, and when we did something wrong, she would tell a little story to remind us of where we came from, of how little we had when we were during those hard years. And so I think, taken after my mom in that way, in that when the kids show a bit of ungratefulness or they're taking certain things for granted, I would remind them of where we come from, how hard the life their grandma had led just to bring us to Canada, and things that she had to do. So I remind them of the sacrifices that grandma had made, and the all that we've gone through the early years. So in bits and pieces though, but I do let them know where they come from.
And what do you think that they can learn from your experiences and from Canada's refugee experience?
I hope that I hope through hearing these stories, that it grounds the children, because when all of us hope to live in a land of hope and opportunities such as Canada, but when you're there, and especially with the younger generation, when everything is coming to them so relatively easily, I fear that they can easily lose sight of what is important in life, and become materialistic, and just not have the values that I think are important to be resilient and such. And so I hope through the stories, that they at least develop a sense of humility, knowing that we came from war and poverty. I think humbles them so that they yeah, it's just that they are humble in who they are, and that I hope they have a sense of gratitude for everything, because I remind them that there was a time when we were desperate for a grain of rice, and so we have to be grateful for what we have, as the little things that we have, and for them to be kind, because I hope for them to see from the story of our lives that truly it was an act of kindness in a moment in time, for myself, with Adrian giving me the doll at that time, and that as a young person had stuck in me for the past 40 years, and that single simple act of kindness in that moment of time has rippled forth through the space, from local to internationally, in terms of what we've been able to do, and then through the generations, through the years, we're still paying for that kindness. And so we shouldn't underestimate the power of kindness, and so yeah.
Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Um, You've been very thorough. I can't think of anything else to say.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your experiences with us.
Thank you so much. Yeah,
we're very honored to have your participation.
No, thank you.
So if you could please tell me about what you've got in your hands there.
What I have is an album that I had compiled for when our family got together with our sponsors at our 30th year celebration. Initially, at 20 years, I had written a little thank you note to our sponsors, and I submitted to the Edmonton Journal, and they were surprisingly gracious enough to print that little thank you message to them, and actually I got a Golden Pen Award for what I had written as well. And because of this, it inspired our families to get together for our 20th anniversary, and then our 30th anniversary we got together at the Enoch Church again to do a 30-year celebration, and I had printed out several albums to give to each of our sponsor family. This book, which is just a compilation of the different all our photos through the years with them. And this is Father Goche, the man who started it all for us. But yeah, it's just a collection of photos of our times with our sponsors, and so I just felt it was important enough to print into a book that would last forever, to signify our bond, our friendship through the years. Yeah.
That's lovely. Thank you.
Thank you.